Okay, can you all see that? See my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm really looking forward to the conversation between us. So I won't talk for too long, but I want to give an overview of Project 2025, as Lydia said. And I'm going to start with where this all started. So in the last 6 months to a year, we've seen this phrase on the news. It's become ubiquitous. We hear it all the time. It's in the presidential debates, but we don't really know where it came from. And it seems like it's a new thing that just popped up in the last year, but that actually is not the case. So the Project 2025 document is over 900 pages long, and it was written by the Heritage Foundation, which is a very large, conservative, not-for-profit organization here in the United States. Their offices are right next door to Union Station. If you go south on Mass Avenue and look to your left, right next to Union Station, you'll see a big building that takes up the whole block. That's the Heritage Foundation. And they partnered with 100 grassroots organizations, so state and local level organizations who I would say are fringe conservative organizations. So they have very fringe ideas that often are not backed by science, that deny historical fact and evidence. And this coalition of 100 organizations partnered with the Heritage Foundation to create this comprehensive document with policy recommendations that they want to see Republican presidents, specifically presidents of the United States, implement. The Heritage Foundation has a lot of money. A lot of us are affiliated with nonprofits. I run a nonprofit. The nonprofits that we're affiliated with, our budgets are a drop in the bucket for what the Heritage Foundation has. And this project in particular was funded by the Koch brothers, who you may have heard of, some of the wealthiest folks in the country, to the wealthiest men in the country, involved in incarceration, involved in climate denial, involved in a lot of other things. Charles Koch is the 14th richest man in the world. And then Leonard Leo Philanthropies. And so Leonard Leo, I don't know as much about Leonard Leo, but those two together paid for 75% of the funding to create this document. So you can see that there are two entities, two individuals, two white men specifically, who are driving the creation and the promotion of these ideas. And they're supporting a lot of these state and local level organizations that technically are not-for-profit organizations, but have very fringe ideas that don't represent the communities they claim to represent. And they also fund the Heritage Foundation to promote these ideas as a think tank. Project 2025, as written, targets evangelical Christians. So their primary audience is evangelical Christians, to persuade evangelical Christians that the ideas that they are espousing are in line with their faith. And that is debatable. We'll get into some of the details a little bit later. You know, it depends on what church you go to and how you're interpreting the Bible and what pastor says. But you'll see in the presentation that some of what they are advancing does match up with Catholic social teaching and with what the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is saying, some of it. So that's a part of what makes Project 2025 so unwieldy, because there are aspects of it that line up with even our faith tradition. The other thing to note about the Heritage Foundation, these state and local level organizations, and the Koch Network and Leonard Leo Philanthropies is that they have spent the last almost 40 years, really, positioning key players inside the Republican Party. So when you think about a Marjorie Taylor Greene, or when you think about some of the more what's the word I'm looking for? Some of the more fringe or controversial Republican leaders, even when you think about the Tea Party. I remember when the Tea Party was like the weirdest thing on the block, and now like we have people who are even more aggressive than the Tea Party. So those candidates for office are folks that have been supported and propped up by some of these state and local level organizations. And this is candidates everywhere from school board representatives, small town mayors, county administrators, judges, all the way up to members of Congress, senators, and presidential candidates. And then the last thing to know about the origins of Project 2025 is that many parts of the plan are in progress. When you listen to the news, or when you hear Project 2025 talked about in the public discourse, it sounds like it's a plan that might get implemented in the future if Donald Trump wins, if a Republican candidate wins. But actually, what's happening is that many parts of the plan are in progress right now. So it's really important to understand that, because if we understand Project 2025 to be dangerous or to be harmful or to be problematic, and many parts of it are, in my opinion, we have to understand that there are things that are already in motion. And when you look at this information, it's already in motion. It's very well funded. It's been planned for at least the last 40 years, and it reaches the grassroots and the national level. So that's some larger context of Project 2025, which I hope is not scary or overwhelming, because it's not all the way done yet. So I have not read the whole 900 pages. I do not recommend that you read the whole 900 pages. There are a lot of resources out there, including the Project 2025 website, that summarizes the 900 pages fairly well. And today I'm going to give you an overview and highlight some of the policies that are in it, to give you kind of a big picture overview. But it is very comprehensive. It has been created as a directive for the next president of the United States, who is Republican, who is conservative. And the 100 organizations and the Heritage Foundation and the folks who organized this and drafted this want to see the next Republican president implement this agenda. So the first pillar of Project 2025 is the policy agenda, which is what we hear the most about, and what I'm going to talk about the most today, because I think it relates to us. It's the most accessible piece to us as voters and as citizens, and as Black people, quite frankly. So first pillar is policy agenda. Then there is a personnel database in the recommendation for Project 2025. So the personnel database is actually about creating a pipeline for conservative candidates who agree with policy, with Project 2025 policy agendas. So they want to create a database of people who, I name it as loyalists, right? People who agree with these policy agendas and who are promising to implement them. Then the third pillar is the Presidential Administration Academy. And this, again, is already in motion. So it offers certificate programs for recruits who are ready to implement this agenda from day one. And I'll talk about why that's dangerous later in the presentation. And then the fourth piece is a 180-day playbook. So first 6 months. And it's a comprehensive plan for every single federal agency. And the idea is that former members of the Trump administration would be appointed as leaders of every federal agency if he were to win again, and they would make changes in their agency according to this playbook. So we have the policy agenda, which is what the president can do in terms of executive orders and from the authority of the White House. The personnel database to collect names of people who agree and document that. The Presidential Administration Academy, which is a certification program, which is related to number 2. And then you have the 180-day playbook for the agencies. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the categories of policy. I'm not going to get into every little detail, but the categories of policy that are in Project 2025. So the first one is climate, environment, and energy. So much of what's in Project 2025 addresses climate change, the environment, and energy. It explicitly contradicts what Pope Francis has called us to do in terms of protecting the environment and the crisis that we're in terms of the environment. And it includes things like rolling back requirements from different federal agencies so for example, the Clean Energy Corps is something that got put into place during the Biden administration that intends to invest $62 billion to have equitable clean energy future. So creating clean energy jobs, et cetera. So Project 2025 says we need to roll that back. We need to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords, and we need to end green subsidies. So I don't know about you if you live in DC, but even if you live in Maryland, I have solar panels on my house. You might have solar panels on your house. I was able to take advantage of a federal program that was given to DC so that I could get solar panels at low or no cost, like many of us, like many of our neighbors. So those types of programs would be eliminated and rolled back. It also would open up the oil pipelines in Alaska, basically for public, open it up to the public. So it would effectively make them open up for trade for corporations, for them to go to the highest bidder and for corporations to do what they want with those pipelines with very little regulation. For endangered species and animals, a lot of the rules that President Biden has put into place in terms of protecting those creatures and also the land would be rolled back. And fossil fuels would be effectively, that use of fossil fuels would effectively be protected under Project 2025. And so we would deny international guidance like from USAID and other agencies that are warning against the use of fossil fuels, incentivizing the use of other sources of energy. All of that would be rolled back. So again, this contradicts directly what Pope Francis has asked us to do. The next big policy area is public health. So there are a range of things in here, and again, a range of them, some that I would say align with what the USCCB is currently saying and some that contradict. So the biggest initiative of Project 2025 would be to gut the authority of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. So if there were another COVID-19 crisis or crisis like that, it would limit what the CDC could communicate. They would not be able to give advice. They would not be able to say, you should wear a mask, you should stay home, you should not go to school or to work, et cetera. And so it would effectively censor the CDC from sharing information and guidance for the general public. Also, it would address LGBTQ communities and also reproductive health and equity. It would prohibit the use of words like diversity, equity, inclusion, gender awareness, reproductive health, reproductive rights in the workplace or in schools. And it also would remove federal protections from targeting someone in the workplace around those identity markers. And this also relates to race. So words around racial equity, words around being anti-racist, anti-Black racism, those words would also be centered in workplaces and schools. Let's see. Oh, vaccinations. So that's a big one. Some of these very small nonprofits involved, their main priority is around vaccinations and denying the usage of vaccines and the efficacy of vaccines. And so, again, it would prohibit the CDC or others from saying that someone should be vaccinated and promoting the use of vaccines. It also would require that the federal government would specifically speak to a gender binary. So it would say men and women are biological realities, and that children must be raised by the male and female biological parents. So this would impact adoption services, it would impact foster care services, and it would impact blended families, it would impact LGBTQ parents and families as well. So those are some of the public health. There's one other public health issue that I wanted to highlight. It would also allow states instead of the federal government to regulate our food. So one state could say this chicken is safe. These are the minimum standards for raising chicken, and then another state could have different standards. So depending on where our chicken or other food is sourced from, they may not actually meet the current minimal health standards that the federal government has. And we know, especially for Black communities, already access to good quality, healthy food is a challenge for us. And so this would decrease the amount of regulation and oversight over where our food is coming from and the health of our food. Family agenda. So I mentioned already the piece about adoptions and LGBTQ families, but I want to make sure I don't forget that part. It also talks about sex and sexuality. And so information about sexually transmitted infections, HIV, AIDS, the CDC and other federal entities would be strictly prohibited from educating the public about these diseases. And again, I think this is really important for Black communities because already it's a challenge for us to get accurate information. It's a challenge for us to get accurate healthcare. And inside of Project 2025 is an assumption that if there's a nuclear family of one man and one woman, that this other information about health is not necessary. But we know that that is not how sex and sexuality works, right? Even if someone is in a monogamous, healthy family, there are so many factors that could impact someone's sexual health. And so Project 2025 would prohibit talking about that. So this, for me, I think is some of the most dangerous. Project 2025 talks a lot about concentrating power. So it wants to increase the authority of the President of the United States. We know, if we were educated in the US, if you had to take a citizenship test in the US, you know that we have 3 branches of government which create a checks and balance system, and they're supposed to balance each other out. What Project 2025 wants to do is to expand the authority of the president. In the president's first 100 days, they want him to execute hundreds of executive orders, to use his authority to push through certain legislation. And they want to fire agency staff, federal agency staff who are not loyal to this agenda, and fast track people from that list I told you about earlier who are loyal, without doing background checks, without doing security clearances, et cetera. And so again, the implication of this, we live in the DC area. Everybody knows somebody that works for the federal government. We probably know lots of people who work for the federal government, people who are very committed to their jobs and to the health of our country and to the safety of our country. They have gone through training, they've gone through background checks, they're committed to security clearances, they have to swear an oath. When I worked for the federal government, I had to swear an oath. Project 2025 wants to bypass that and have the loyalty be to this agenda and to the president of their choosing, and not to the country as a whole. And I think this is really important. And I think that we, as Africa Diaspora Ministry, have a unique wisdom around why this is dangerous, because we are connected to so many countries and so many stories and experiences of colonialism where we know the danger of this path. So this is my last slide, and then I'd love to have a conversation. And I called this Sankofa moment because for me, this is about using the wisdom of our community, of the diaspora, to understand the implications of this policy, which again has been presented to many Christians as being in line with our faith values. And I would argue that it is not. So as I mentioned, some of these policies, if you look at them on the surface, they align with the USCCB and Catholic social teaching, and some of them do not. So I think any candidate, any policy position is probably going to be aligned with Catholic social teaching in some ways and not aligned in other ways. And I think, especially as Black Catholics, we have seen the bishops sometimes be myopic or short-sighted, even in their policy. And they have had to reform themselves and evolve over time when taking our communities more into account. So even though on the surface there is alignment, I invite us to dig a little deeper. The practices and infrastructure that Project 2025 wants to advance, it echoes authoritarian regimes that we in the diaspora around the world have experienced. Our family members have experienced. We understand the impact of those things. And so, regardless of whether we agree with one policy position or two policy positions within Project 2025, the way in which they want to enact it advances authoritarianism in a way that is dangerous for Black people. And we've seen this over and over again throughout history and over again throughout the world. It is very important for us to stay cognizant of who is funding and promoting this work in their self-interest. So again, the Koch brothers and Leo Philanthropies, who fund the vast majority of this, when you look at the overarching sentiment they have, when you look at their overall analysis, their relationships, their priorities and values in the world, they are not interested in the well-being of Black people and Black people in the diaspora. So if they are pouring a large portion of their money into this and controlling the trajectory of this, I would argue that they are advancing something that is not considering or not prioritizing or even not maybe explicitly against the interests and the experiences of Black people in the United States. And then lastly, I would say we have to remember that aspects of this are already being implemented. So when we think about speaking against it or when we think about intervening, we have to realize that we're talking about things that are already in motion that will escalate if a candidate who is in line with this gets elected to the White House. So I believe that is my last slide. So I'll stop sharing and I'll pause there so we can have a conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Can everybody do a round of applause? That was amazingly crystal
Unmute
clear.
yourself, Lydia.
And it was amazingly crystal clear.
Yes,
And I'm sorry. Right now, I want to turn it over to Albert so he can facilitate the discussion.
Right. I know one gets this whole sense of deja vu, but Janice, thank you for this sort of succinct presentation. I think we all know that this has been going on for decades, but it is becoming an issue of now, and it's rearing its ugly head because it's becoming a real threat. And what I will probably, before I ask others to come in and have this conversation, it's been very clever in touching on some of the very critical issues that as Catholics really touch us. We want to address them. And sometimes there's pain here and there. But many a time, we tend to sit on the fringes and find it a little difficult to engage in these conversations. So as a person of faith and taking on this agenda and identifying those who are behind it with the huge sums of money, what are the threat elements that at least you will caution us as we try to engage on this issue?
So as people of faith, and what I talk about in my organization and what I try to do in my life is think about discernment. If it were easy, if there were an easy right answer, we would have most of the problems that we have, right? And so we have to pray, we have to educate ourselves, we have to seek wise counsel, we have to read scripture, and we have to ask God for the clarity to see underneath the surface. I think that is the opportunity for us as people of faith. This document targets us, but they just want to tell the surface story. But again, when you dig underneath, you see who's funding it, you see what the long-term agenda is. Again, we have Sankofa, we have the wisdom to know that concentrating power in one executive ruler always leads to bad things. We know this, right? So I would say use our discernment as people of faith and speak out about that. But I'm curious what other people think as well.
Okay, so I will open it up for others, and I see Lydia, your hand is up already.
I have a question. It's not a complicated question. As we learn more and move towards action steps, would you suggest, where would you suggest we start? Should we start with the parts of the plan that are already implemented and start activating against those, pushing back against, or should we look to the things that they are looking towards implementing in the future and try to prevent those?
So I think it's the things that are already happening, but not in a reactionary way. So what I mean by that is, I mentioned those 100 small grassroots nonprofit organizations, and I think this is how we can. I think this is how we can address it. I was in Maryland the other day for something, and there was a sign, and not like PG County, but farther out. There was a sign for a candidate for school board. And I saw that sign and I said, I wonder who that person is. Because several of these small nonprofits are putting school board candidates who want to remove DEI from the curriculum, who deny slavery, who, want to implement some of these ideas. So I think there's some hyper local things we can do. Even in DC, sometimes, you see names popping up on the ballot or you see these signs. I'm like, who are these people? I've never heard of these people before, right? So I think paying attention at the local level to some of those ideas is really, really important. I think just like we educate our friends and family about making sure they go vote, we need to educate them about what this is as well, because we can know, but we're 9, 10 people on the call today. We need to help people understand who's funding this. So as much as you can on social media and your conversations, you can address those things, and advocating for candidates and policies that go against some of this. So Natal's saying he can't hear me. Can other people hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, Intel, you check your volume. We've been hearing you make an intervention. I thought you wanted to ask, but we all can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
So Lydia, I would say start with where they are right now and pay attention and help educate others, because it's very insidious. It's very coded and shaded. And we can understand, but we have to help other people understand what it is they're experiencing, because a lot of people are getting bamboozled and caught up. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you for that comment. And before we had this, we had a little chat with Father Pat. And sometimes, of course, as you rightly pointed out, our church has not always been on the forefront of some of these progressive agendas. But of course, luckily for us, our pastor has embraced this, and he's seen it as an issue that we got to find ways to have our voices heard. So Lydia is right on point. At this stage of the process, as we seek to inform ourselves and not to get caught up in the issues that seek to divide us, strategy of engaging and being part of a conversation becomes very critical, because it becomes quickly a cancel culture. Nobody's listening to you. And that's really where we are. Intel, if you are able to, we could hear you, but if you can hear us, probably try another speaker or something. But I think I like the caution that you're giving us. And as a ministry, I like the dimension that you've pointed at. We no longer live in a small village. We live in a global village. And many of us have had that exposure, connections with the continent. We saw what happened during the pandemic. And so there's relevance in bringing those experiences to bear in confronting this issue. And you've really warned us about what dictators do and what they do. And it really becomes one of having the courage of our convictions. I know St. Augustine has a culture of really sort of engaging. We saw that during the anti-apartheid movement, how we all came together and campaigned, some even against some of the banks that they were investing in. So I invite the others to share their thoughts on how best to move forward as the ministry. And what I've already asked Jeanne to be mindful of is we're going to have this sort of in what they call click pieces and distribute them on social media. So many of our members don't have the attention span to listen through everything, but her slides are very right on point. The presentation makes it a lot easy to understand, and the call to engage, and I also like your tone because it's really one of, in as much as we got to call a spade, seeking to demonize those individuals. They are who they are, and we got to find ways of engaging them, So I'm really happy for their approach. I invite others